Hello, beloved game designers and gamers. Did you face this problem? You are working on a cooperative game and changing the amount of players destroys your complete game design or balancing? Either way, let's have a look at the problem so that all of my millions of viewers can follow along. You play a hero and fight against, let's say, 5 enemies. Everything is balanced perfectly, of course, and feels great. You need 10 hits with your machine gun, causing 10 damage each hit, or you need 1 shot with your sniper, causing 100 damage each hit. Now a second hero, your friend, enters the ring, and surprise, you both do the double amount of damage now as you shoot with 2 weapons. The game is only 50% as difficult as before. Easy to understand problem, I guess. But is the solution as easy? For sure. You just design your game for 4 players so that it's too hard for one person and they need to convince their friends to play with them, and you can sell more copies of your game. Okay, this can and sometimes is a valid solution, but let's say you want the difficulty to scale with the amount of friends you could convince to spend their rare free evenings with you. When I faced the problem the first time, my first thought was, easy equation. If we add 2 heroes in the game, I just double all attribute values of the enemies like health and damage. Please, you can believe me that it didn't take that long for me to recognize that altering all values is scaling the difficulty more than just 100%. What do I mean by that? We stay at our example and the enemies have 100 health, but furthermore cause 20 damage. We want the difficulty to be increased by 100% as we have 100% more heroes, from 1 to 2 players. As we double the enemy attributes to 200 health and 40 damage, we have to consider the time and attack type. One player needs 100% more time to defeat the enemy as it has 100% more life. But as the enemy lives 100% longer, it will also cause 100% more damage, cause it will hit you more often. As we increase the damage by 100% and are hit 100% more often, we would suffer 300% more damage when fighting against it. Seems wrong, right? So just increase the health and let the damage be the same? Now we put the second player into the scenario. As we have 2 players shooting at the enemy, we have 100% more hero damage, and it will take the same time as before to kill the enemy, and he wouldn't cause double the amount of damage, which means that heroes have 100% more health but lose the same amount as before, which makes the game easier, right? So doubling the health and damage would be correct. But what would be the consequence? Imagine playing with 4 friends and the enemies do 400% of the damage they do against one hero. If your hero has 80 health, he could normally survive 3 hits and die on the 4th. Now he would be a one-shot. And as the hero dies, the damage output of the heroes is decreased, which will take more time then to kill the enemy, and now it's getting even more complex when we would analyze the math. As we could calculate this and find a value to be fair for this scenario, from a design perspective it's not a good solution, because it feels completely different and perhaps bad if you are killed instantly by an enemy which was causing 25% of your health before. And also, this is not a general solution. Think of an AoE attack by the enemy which could hit multiple players. So you calculate, it's probably going to hit 2 or 4 players. So let's make it 50% more damage. AoE attacks have an automatic scaling on the enemy amount, which we need to consider on every enemy. Luckily, I don't have those. And even if your attacks would be all on single targets, it's more complex than just adding 100% damage. Think of games like Enter the Gungeon. In many games, you rotate around enemies to avoid being hit. Enter the Gungeon feels way more difficult for me in co-op mode, because you run in attacks which were triggered by your friend. It's much harder to predict a bullet movement if the enemies have more targets. How much % difficulty scaling is that? But the problem of 4 times more damage of the enemies is the same problem with 4 times more health. In my game I have small spiders, which can be killed with 1 pistol shot. They are hard to hit with this weapon, but when you hit them finally, they are dead at least. The feeling would be completely destroyed if you need to hit a spider 4 times now with a gun. Because in reality the other heroes will be fighting against other enemies and you are probably facing the spider alone. So, scaling the difficulty is at least an individual problem of a game and can't be just solved by doubling health values as a general solution. Perhaps you see the same easy solution. If you want weapons and enemies to feel the same as before from a design perspective, just increase the amount of enemies. If there are 4 players, make 4 times the amount of enemies. First of all, depending on their attacks, I would say, no, this doesn't work always. Think of enemies with big AoE attacks which are hard to dodge. Now dodge 4 times the amount of attacks. There is no space to dodge left. So you need to divide the attack cooldown by 4 and let them attack one after another, for example. But luckily the enemies in my game have all the same attack. If they run against you, you are damaged. Let's pretend this will never change in my game. So this solution would be really good for my game, wouldn't it? Of course not, because scaling the amount of units, independent whether it's the enemy or the heroes in a co-op game, always influences the effectiveness of AoE attacks on both sides. As my heroes have weapons like grenade launchers and machine guns, which scatter a lot but hit more often the more enemies there are you could accidentally hit, you would be an idiot if you go for a sniper rifle if there are 4 times the amount of enemies to kill. So you could say, okay then, if the sniper rifle is less effective, scale some attributes like the firing speed. Let the sniper weapon shoot 4 times as fast if there are 4 times as many enemies and the grenade launcher stays the same. From an emotional design perspective or the player anticipation, this doesn't make any sense, because players want to feel a difference between the weapons. The sniper feels slow but with insane damage. The machine pistol is fast but less damage, simplified. But I think it's a good idea to adjust those values where they don't change the feeling of a weapon. As there are 4 times more enemies in this scenario, you could divide the damage of the machine pistol by 4. The weapon may feel weaker than others, so it could be okay for the players. Or you reduce the explosion size of the grenade launcher. There are more enemies, and as the size is smaller, it could hit the same amount of enemies as before. For me, this solution is far from perfect because, for example, the machine pistol is designed to scatter and don't hit every target. The sniper rifle is designed to make hitting even more difficult. Now, if there are so many enemies, your aiming skills aren't required a lot anymore. Perhaps you had this idea too. If there are 4 times as many enemies as before and AoE weapons are hitting more enemies now, just multiply the size of the battlefield by 4 and AoE weapons will hit as many units as before. I have another game in which this could possibly work, but I don't want to scale the enemy amount because the enemy AI and attack effects need a lot of computing power and multiplying all those causes performance drops. Let's say we don't have this problem, as in Zombiepede. Computing is easy here. The problem here is the local co-op design. I don't want a split screen design here. All share the same view. As I would increase the battlefield, I needed to zoom out and units would be much harder to see, or you need to run from A to B and always run around, which would be very annoying. Let's pretend it's an online co-op game or split screen and everyone has its own view. I really don't like that solution too. It would feel a little bit like the early game of League of Legends. Yes, you are together in a game, but you have your own lane you are defending and most time you don't see your mates. As the battlefield is bigger with more enemies, you don't need to play together. You play 4 games at the same time. Much simplified too. Okay, but what's left? I don't want to scale the enemy amount and don't want to scale enemy attributes as weapons feel different then. I could limit the use of weapons. As you find resources in my game to buy ammunition, I could just divide the resources you find by 4. Weapons feel the same, enemies are the same, perfect. Yeah, apart from that, the game is all about upgrading your weapons and feeling the power of your attack speed, new damage, weapon penetration, which you just can't use during 75% of the game as you are waiting to have enough resources. No thanks. Another solution would be to build different levels for different numbers of players. Then you just spawn the right amount of enemies or different types so that AoE weapons aren't that effective sometimes. But let's be honest, that's a lot of work and kind of making 4 different games. This also gives the player the feeling they are missing content if they don't play the game with all numbers of players. I don't like that solution. I thought of increasing the necessary high score in my game as my game design allows endless playing in one level. So you could expect 1 player to reach 1000 points and 4 players should be able to reach 4000 points, for example. I see 2 problems immediately. First, the playtime would be much longer for more players and that can be a negative experience if you don't get more content in the same time. Your weapon feels great at 1000 points. You have your upgrades. Now you need to play till 4000 but the game isn't offering you more to progress. Second, by design the game is also getting more difficult by time because enemies are spawning faster. So if I increase the playtime, I increase the enemy amount, which makes AoE weapons far more effective again. So this isn't working for me. Side note, I wouldn't increase the needed high score, I would divide the points that players gather so that the high scores are comparable independent of the number of players. When I redesign my games to fix some problems, I try to keep in mind to not take a good feeling of players away. As I would follow the approach to increase enemy numbers, I said that I could decrease the machine pistol damage or the explosion size of the grenade launcher to make it less effective. Imagine you play the game alone and then you play it with some friends afterwards. You choose your grenade launcher and surprise, there is this tiny baby explosion. That feels disappointing. The better solution could be to make other weapons more effective. So you could add upgrades for your single target weapons like the sniper rifle. As I just gave it a penetrating effect, it could hit multiple enemies now, but is also very effective against enemies with big health. I added a further upgrade, which causes fragments to appear as you hit enemies. So I added AoE effects on single target weapons. And as there are more enemies spawning the longer you stay alive, it also is helpful in single player games to buy AoE effects on those weapons. Giving players the possibility to react to the challenge a game offers is always a good solution. Anyway, we have the same problem. It's not such a big difference if players would always go for AoE weapons in co-op, or if it doesn't matter which weapon you buy as long as you buy the AoE upgrades. But it can be even a design choice to let players always go for their favorite weapon and let them buy the needed upgrade to defeat the current enemies. You could also offer a high damage upgrade, reducing the fire speed of an MP to take out big enemies. I hope that I could show that scaling the enemy difficulty is a complex problem and depends on the game you are designing. There is not the one right answer, but perhaps there is one generalizable method we could all use. The following is what I'm doing with my game now. I gather all of those aspects I found and explained in this video, scaling the attribute values of the enemies, the enemy amount, attributes of weapons, the battlefield size, resources, high score points, change the level design or add new upgrades to the weapons. And as altering the health of an enemy by 300% makes a weapon feel really weak, I could perhaps only adjust a little bit at this point and try to adjust a little bit on another. If you are able to find 10 points in your game where you could adjust the difficulty, you could just add 10% to each point and players wouldn't probably recognize it that much. If the game lasts 10% longer to get the same high score, who cares? If you spawn 20% more enemies and increase the battlefield by 10%, you make AoE weapons only 10% more effective, and players perhaps don't recognize if you make them 10% weaker. I think you get the point. In my special case, I made the adjustments depending on the enemies. As I want the small spiders to die by one pistol shot, I can't even increase their health by 10%. But you can ask for their purpose. They are designed to make AoE weapons useful, so I don't care if their amount is increased as I want players to buy AoE anyway. So I decided to increase their amount by 50% per player and don't change their health. On the other hand, I have enemies like ghouls, which are big and have a lot of health. They invite players to buy sniper rifles, for example. They should feel like hard to kill anyway. So I'm fine with increasing the health by 90% per player and keep the amount of the same. Perhaps it gives players the feeling of, let's group, we need to fight this one together. Or one player decides to max his damage on his sniper to even one-shot those. I said that it feels bad if a weapon does only 30% of the damage as you are used to. I try to face the problem a little bit in this way. I don't show health bars where you could directly see that it's just 30% of the damage you did before. Instead, I give the players a feedback in slowing the enemies. The enemy movement speed is always relative to their current health. So if you hit a big enemy with a sniper, it will still slow down a lot, which feels at least different to hitting it with a pistol. For me it feels good right now, but I still need to test the game with 4 players. I hope you enjoyed the video and perhaps I could give you some ideas for your games. Please feel free to share some ideas for my game if you have better or additional solutions to scale the difficulty. I'm really looking forward for your suggestions. And as always, thanks for watching and keep designing.